Earlier today, the president of Mexico, Felipe Calderon, and the president of the United States, Barack Obama, met and held a joint press conference. Now, there were only a couple of questions that were asked. One of them, however, asked by a member of the Mexican press corps. The reporter was wondering from President Obama what exactly was being done to interdict or stop guns from the United States going into Mexico. And here is what President Obama said.
We believe that we can shape an enforcement strategy that slows the flow of guns into Mexico while at the same time preserving our Constitution. You asked whether I have veto power over a particular bill. I think that the challenge that we have right now is not a particular bill, but rather that we are trying to work our way through more effective enforcement mechanisms to prevent straw purchasers from buying caches of weapons, transporting them across the border. We've made progress on that front, given the authority and administrative power that we already possess. We have seen a significant increase in the number of weapons that have been confiscated. We have put more and more people behind bars for the transfer of weapons across the border into Mexico. We recognize that it's not enough and that we've got to do more.
So the president talked about slowing the flood of guns into Mexico, trying more effective enforcement mechanisms to prevent straw purchases. Well, hours after that press conference was held, CBS reporter Cheryl Atkinson broke a story she's actually been covering for a couple of weeks. In her first report, she described a number of ATF officials and executives, none of whom would be identified for fear of losing their job, that talked about an ATF program that actually allowed firearms to be purchased, in some cases over the objections of the firearm seller, who would call ATF and talk to ATF and say, we don't feel comfortable making this sale. But the ATF, according to these agents, not only allowed these sales to proceed, ultimately allowed the firearms to enter into Mexico and end up in the hands of the drug cartels. Now, again, in Cheryl Atkinson's first report, none of these ATF officials would go on the record. Tonight, however, a very different story.
John Dodson, a federal agent, says what he was asked to do was beyond belief.
You were intentionally letting guns go to Mexico.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, the agency was.
An alcohol, tobacco, and firearms senior agent assigned to this Phoenix office since 2010, Dodson's job is to stop gun trafficking across the border. Instead, he says he was ordered to sit by and watch it happen. Investigators call the tactic letting guns walk, in this case into the hands of criminals who would use them in Mexico and the U.S. Dodson's bosses say that never happened. Now he's risking his job to go public.
I'm boots on the ground here in Phoenix and telling you we've been doing it every day since I've been here. Here I am. Tell me I didn't do the things that I did. Tell me you didn't order me to do the things that I did. Tell me it didn't happen. Now you have a name on it, you have a face to put with it. Here I am, someone now. Tell me it didn't happen.
Again, that ATF agent, John Dodson, and you heard Cheryl Atkinson say that the Department of Justice and the ATF deny that this ever happened. She also mentioned this in her first report, saying that in a letter, the Justice Department, which oversees ATF, says the agency has never knowingly allowed the sale of quote-unquote assault weapons to suspected gun runners. Well, Atkinson did not just have the on-camera statements by Agent Dodson. She also had internal ATF emails as well.
Documents show the inevitable result. The guns ATF let go began showing up at crime scenes in Mexico. And as ATF stood by, watching thousands of weapons hit the street, the Fast and Furious Group supervisor noted the escalating Mexican violence. 958 killed in March 2010, the most violent month since 2005. The same email notes, our subjects purchased 359 firearms during March alone, including numerous Barrett .50 caliber rifles.
Did you feel that ATF was partly perhaps to blame for the escalating violence in Mexico and on the border?
Yes, ma'am. I even asked them if they could see the correlation between the two. The more that our guys buy, the more violence that we're having down there.
Senior agents, including Dodson, told us they confronted their supervisors over and over.
And what was the answer? What did they say?
If you're going to make an omelet, you got to scramble some eggs.
Now, while this was taking place, you will recall the president of Mexico, Felipe Calderón, came to the United States, addressed a joint session of Congress, called for more gun control laws. The Obama administration supported Felipe Calderón in his call for more gun control laws as well. You also had the Obama administration trying to put in place the emergency regulation that would have required federally licensed firearms retailers in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas to report the multiple sales of long guns. Now, while all of this has been slowly coming out in the press, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley has been asking for information from the ATF. So far, though, according to Cheryl Atkinson at CBS, he has not received much help.
Dodson and a dozen other ATF sources have all told the same story to Senator Grassley, who's investigating.
You've tried to get some answers from ATF. What's been the response?
The response has been practically zilch. From the standpoint that documents we want, we have not gotten them. And I think it's a case of stonewalling.
Dodson says he hopes that speaking out helps the family of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry. They haven't been told much of anything about his murder or where the bullet came from.
First of all, I would tell them that I'm sorry. Second of all, I would tell them that I've done everything that I can for them to get the truth. After this, I don't know what else I can do, but I hope they get it.
Now, the Border Patrol agent that was mentioned, Brian Terry, was killed in December of 2010, and authorities say that one of the guns, or the gun that was used to kill Agent Terry, was one of those guns that the ATF had observed being purchased and had allowed to go to Mexico. On a related story, one of the questions that was asked of both President Obama and President Calderón today at their joint press conference was whether or not agreements would change that would allow American law enforcement to actually be armed while they are on the job south of the border. You will recall that ICE agent Jaime Avila was killed just a few weeks ago, and he was on a road between Monterrey and Mexico City on the job, on duty, but because U.S. law enforcement officers are not allowed to have their sidearms with them south of the border, he was unarmed when he and his colleague were ambushed by members of the Zetas cartel. As for Special Agent or Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry, there are allegations that he and his fellow agents were also ordered to use non-lethal beanbag rounds against armed cartel members. Back in late December, the Customs and Border Protection Southwest Border Field Branch Office of Public Affairs released a statement that said, quote, "There was no order given to CBP law enforcement personnel, now or in the past, that dictates the use of less than lethal devices before using deadly force." But Brian Terry's brother, Kent, says that the other agents who were there that night told him that they were instructed to use the non-lethal beanbags first, and in fact, even after ordering the cartel members to drop their weapons, which were visible, in order the cartel members ignored, by the way, documents show that 2 Border Patrol agents did fire first using those beanbag rounds at the cartel members. Cartel members fired back, and one of those shots killed Brian Terry. Now, since the airing of this piece on CBS News this evening, Attorney General Eric Holder says that he has asked the Justice Department Inspector General to, quote, or in the words of the Associated Press, take another look at the efforts of U.S. agents who hunt gun traffickers along the U.S. border with Mexico. What that means exactly is still unclear. The ATF also told Cheryl Atkinson of CBS News that they would be appointing a committee or a panel to examine the strategy. But again, both agencies have gone on the record and have said that there have been no firearms allowed intentionally to cross over into Mexico, a claim that is contradicted directly now by the on-camera interview given by ATF agent John Dodson. So we are going to continue following this case here because clearly this is going to be a big one. But I wanted to give you the details and the background, because this is a little, I guess, confusing perhaps for some people. But keep in mind, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is an ATF agent who says that even as the administration was complaining that not enough laws were in place to combat gun trafficking, this agent says the ATF was engaged in an Operation Fast and Furious was the name of it, that would actually observe firearms being purchased, in some cases allow these sales to proceed over the objections of the firearm retailers, and then watch those guns being walked into Mexico where they would end up in the hands of the drug cartels. The reasoning behind this, according to the CBS News report, is that the agency was hoping at some point to have a major bust in Mexico, where they could round up hundreds of firearms and perhaps dozens of cartel members and point to this as a success because an ATF Project Gunrunner had been criticized for focusing on small-time straw purchasers. And so perhaps the agency wanted to have a very visible success to point to. Unfortunately, as Cheryl Atkinson pointed out, no such bust ever materialized. And instead, thousands of firearms, according to Agent Dodson, were allowed to flow into Mexico with the knowledge, again, according to Agent Dodson, of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. So far, there has been no comment from President Barack Obama about this. Again, Eric Holder has said that the Inspector General will take a look at the strategy and the efforts of the ATF agents on the border, but the Justice Department has also turned down a request by Senator Grassley for copies of communications between ATF headquarters in Washington and the agency's Phoenix field office after Brian Terry's death in Arizona. To Senator Grassley, the Justice Department said, quote, "We are not in a position to disclose documents relating to any ongoing investigation." ATF said in a statement today that the review will enable the Bureau to, quote, "maximize its effectiveness when undertaking complex firearms trafficking investigations and prosecutions." Statement said, quote, "It will support the goals of ATF to stem the illegal flow of firearms to Mexico and combat firearms trafficking in the United States." So we will continue to follow this story very closely. We will report on all of the details and any new developments that may occur, including any calls from Congress for an independent investigation. If Senator Grassley has been asking for this information, the DOJ has not given it. Now the Attorney General says an Inspector General will look into the crime-fighting strategies on the border. I can tell you that there are other members of Congress who are also watching this case very closely, and I would not be surprised if there are further developments from Capitol Hill as well. So that's where we stand in terms of the ATF and the allegations that it allowed firearms south of the border. Now an agent has gone on the record, and you can imagine that tomorrow there will be a lot of folks talking about this, and again, I would not be surprised to see some new developments.